the Compact project and also from the Jozef Stefan Institute in Slovenia, whom I thank for accepting the invitation to join us in this debate and reflection on current and divisive issues such as the effects of misinformation on journalism, society and democracy itself. The title of this table is Fake News and Journalism and not the other way around, which symbolically says a lot about the proportion of the theme. Journalism and journalists are not only struggling with the viability and monetization of business in the face of the imperative of free and open source, they are also struggling to defend the profession and consequently to defend the legislation that regulates the media and journalistic activity, as well as the principles enshrined in the Portuguese constitution, where the right to information is claimed and not the right to misinformation. So not being a new problem, it is in this century that it has gained dimension. To social networks, support communities, the digital has brought new possibilities, but it has also introduced a disruptive element with global impact, being this the central point of our discussion today. So, given your different backgrounds, academic, research, media management, journalism, so people who live, experience and think about it, I would like to ask you to share your insights on the topic. And I'm going to start with
social networks. Sometimes we don't distinguish between what is a journalistic article from a well-known newspaper from what is anonymous blog giving some information without any factual how do you say not going by the journalistic rules and without any factual sustentation. So nowadays, fact-checking is like an industry where some journalists, like Polígrafo here in Portugal, dedicate themselves to fact-check everything that goes online and trying to distinguish between what is journalism and what is not, and what is true and what is false, and that big gray area of what is imprecise or misleading, which is more complex to explain here in such a few minutes. So here in Polígrafo, we have some protocols with Facebook. Facebook have an internal system that when someone denounces a publication as fake news or as a doubtful article, we analyze it. So it's a direct protocol inside Facebook. And we have also a protocol with IFCN, which is an international association of fact-checking platforms. And we have also a protocol with IMPRESA and SIC with a weekly program of Polígrafo at SIC at Monday night. I would prefer to respond to some questions that could come from the audience, but this is the basics of what fact-checking is. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Tanja, please.
Thank you. So my name is Tanja Pavleska. I come from Slovenia, but I'm here representing the Compact project, where I'm leading the work package about regulatory frameworks and policies in the area of social media and content convergence. And information is something that should not be in the public sphere at all. So this is when privacy is broken or some harmful content like terroristic content, etc. So all these organizations that are dealing with combating this kind of information disorder, we're trying to analyze them by country and by their context of acting and functioning, from the perspective of how they address the fundamental human rights, from the perspective of transparency and accountability, and many other areas that we have come to. So this is what I would put it very briefly. We have developed a methodology for performance assessment of these initiatives. And there we have tried to see the state of the current regulation in the field, the potential for additional regulatory means, and the employment of artificial intelligence and technical means, something that has not been researched, studied, analyzed in the context of regulation. And what we so far discovered, we have analyzed 24, so not the entire set of EU countries, but we were not supposed to do even 24. It was just to pilot in several countries, but the results were so interesting and encouraging that we said, okay, aside of the budget that we have within the project, this is very interesting and insightful because the development methodology turned out to be very effective for this analysis. And we discovered that out of the nearly 150 analyzed initiatives across the whole continent, there were very little number of them, a small number of them, who employed any kind of technology and were very reluctant to rely on technology in the first place, not to mention on artificial intelligence. Something that is very different than what Gustavo had now told me, and that surprised me. Then regulation is still not taking pace in Europe, but there are very important development, and in some countries there are even regulatory, there is regulation in place, like UK, France, and Germany. Then transparency and accountability are largely not addressed by these initiatives that are combating information disorder, which is very unfortunate, because in order to do something that addresses the public trust, you have to be trustworthy yourself. And to be trustworthy, you have to have some means for transparency and accountability yourself. And when this is present, it's like you're undermining your own work. So there are methodological, operational failures, and through the project we are trying to also prepare policy recommendations so that any type of policy takes them into account and crafts the next requirements based on that. And we've been successful because from the European Commission, they told us precisely to which person to address these kind of policy recommendations, because all of them are very relevant. They address all of the stakeholders that are concerned by these types of regulation. So for the final results, we will probably be back to some other events in the future.
Okay, thank you. Isabel, please.
Hi, good morning. So yeah, multitasking.
Do you want to?
No, it's okay. Thank you. So just a few context words first. Then to talk to you a little bit about a project that the Portuguese Journalists Union has been developing to address this issue. But first of all, it's important to have the notion that we nowadays produce in a couple of hours as much information as human beings have produced in the last 2,000 years. So 2 hours, 2,000 years. This is smashing. It's impossible to deal with this without preparation. It's good, it's great, but we are not prepared. It was technology is much faster than people, which is why we use technology, so that it's better than us. But then it also creates problems. It doesn't mean, obviously, that technology is not good. It means we have to prepare ourselves, and we are not preparing ourselves. Because other forward topic is that information is essential for knowledge, but it's not knowledge in itself. So information needs to be worked out in order to become knowledge. And these two somehow simple, it's not simple, but simple facts have created new problems, so to speak, that we have to address. We journalists, the Journalists Union, thought that we have a responsibility to work on this because, of course, our job, so to speak, is to protect journalists, to help journalists, but journalists have a civic work, a civic obligation. So by protecting journalists, we are also protecting civil society, so to speak, because we need journalism to be trustworthy and different from all the massive information that is coming every day in our phones. You don't even need to search for it; it's beeping all day long in our phones. So, to address this issue, what we have discussed is that this is not going to be solved with a conference, with the outdoors. It's the only way to really address this issue is by education. It takes a long time because, as you know, that's much longer, much more difficult than just do some slogans. But is, in our point of view, the only way to really address it. So, to go to the practical issue of this, we have organized a program of media literacy that we are working on with the Ministry of Education and with another institution which is Saint George. It's the institution that works and teaches journalists, so to speak. And this project has already had a pilot last year, and we will go now for the second pilot of this project. So last year we have taught 70 teachers on media literacy, and I say with quotes teach because we tell the teachers, and it's true that we are not exactly teaching them, we are helping them with some areas that they are not so familiar with. They are not journalists, of course, so our point of view is that if they know better what is the work of a journalist, how is it that we fact check? How is it that we can address information and see if we can trust it, for instance? This is our work, our everyday work. So if we help teachers know how to do this better, they can then work on projects with their students, because our final goal is to address the students, so the young people, as you. But to do that, we had to go through, because we cannot address directly children and young people, so we cannot. I mean, we could, but in a one or two very not steady way. So we wanted something steady, something that really made a difference. And so in this first pilot, we have worked with 70 teachers with schools from all over the country. And now the second one that will start next month will be, so we doubled. We will be 200 teachers and the double of schools. And we are now doing it also in Azores. The first one, we didn't have the logistics yet to do it in the island. So we want to go to all the country and so maybe spread the word, so to speak. It's not one day. It's a 5-day work, 5 day in different times, not in only 1 month. It's in several months. We work with the teachers, and then we help them create projects. So the final goal is that they create projects with their students, so that students get to know better how to look at information, how to look at it critically, because that is the issue. Information is here, but you need to look at it critically. Not everything is true, not everything is completely true, because one of the problems of fake news is that sometimes it's half true, half lie, and that's even a bigger problem, because then it's more difficult to identify. So this is what we believe can make a difference in the long run. This is a long-term issue. It's not to be addressed in 1 day, in 1 month, in 1 year. It's going to be here. Technologies are going to be here more and more. So the only way is to be better prepared to use them in our favor and not against us.
Thank you. Jessica?
Okay. So I'm assuming that my role on this panel is to provide the sort of scholarly academic perspective on these issues. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the, sort of the general topic of fake news and journalism. And the way in which fake news threatens journalism, kind of on 2 different fronts, right? The first being the way that the term fake news is weaponized by politicians and other public figures who don't like stories that journalists write about them, and it's used to discredit journalists, right? At the same time, it's also threatening journalism because there is fake news, and so that information misinforms or disinforms citizens who journalists' job is to try to keep informed. And so I like that we have sort of a variety of different approaches presented on this panel, because they represent some of the ways journalists have attempted to fight back against fake news. The idea of fact-checking is laudable and I think often celebrated. And although fact-checking increasingly is getting politicized in that, of course, no facts are totally objective, right? And presenting them in any context with additional facts might appear biased to the people who disagree with it, that kind of thing. And studies on the effectiveness of fact-checking are actually kind of mixed, right? That often spreading a fact-checked story just doesn't change the minds of people who believed the story in the first place, and actually further spreads the incorrect information to people who didn't see it. So there's a sort of, there's a question there of whether that's, ultimately going to be the solution. Another one that's been put forward, of course, is transparency. And this gets a little bit at the idea of media literacy and the work that the Portuguese Journalists Union is doing. And this idea that journalists will be more transparent with the public about the way that they do their work, right? The processes, the routines that they go through to verify and fact check information, and also about their sources, right? To provide source material where possible in order to give their information more credibility. And then there's media literacy. Media literacy education, of course, has been around for a long time, but there's a sort of, I think, renewed interest when it comes to fighting fake news. And I think that the kind of project that the Portuguese Journalists Union is doing is an especially effective one in that it makes journalists partners with teachers. And I think the more that journalists can put themselves, present themselves to the public, right? And let the public get to understand the work that they do, because often media literacy actually, increased media literacy education actually diminishes trust in media, because people come to understand, they get corporate ownership, and so they see the ways that media is imperfect and then get maybe a little more distrustful or dismissive of it. And the goal should actually be to say, okay, here's why and where journalism may sometimes be inaccurate, but also here's why and where you can trust it and what you might do. And then there's the last piece that I think is related to fake news and journalism inextricably, which is social media and social media users. And I think that there hasn't been enough attention yet on the idea that social media users need to take more responsibility, need to be given a stronger sense of the responsibilities that they have, instead of, I think there's this sense of it's a fun free-for-all and just send whatever you want, and hey, I saw that and I'll like it. And so, both structurally, if we can introduce mechanisms in social media sites that make it a little harder to share information, create a step that says, are you sure you want to share this? Do you know where it came from? Something like that lengthens the time just by a little between when you see a piece of information and when you pass it on to someone else, or when you indicate that you like it, which of course amplifies it for other users. And maybe in some sense, sort of readopting this term citizen journalism that I think was often sort of dismissed or denigrated by journalists who saw it as suggesting that citizens can do what journalists do. And I think often those sites that encouraged or invited citizen journalism did seem to imply that, like citizen journalism or journalism is easy, anyone can do it. And instead, I think maybe we could try to readopt that term and say, you are all citizen journalists, so start doing some journalism. When you go to share information, when you read information online, check it against some other information, make sure you can confirm it with a variety of sources and against what you've observed in your life, instead of just treating each piece of information you see as a, momentary blip in your brain that then gets passed on to the next one. So. That's all.
I have to say this, or else, that is the part that makes it like, do that,
yes,
or
yeah.
else, because you are accountable. Once you start,
exactly.
You abide by those principles.
Yes.
Just
exactly. Okay.
Nuno?
I don't know which is he needs this one.
I need a second one.
We could get you more, maybe.
Okay. And the third okay.
Press conference.
So,
yeah,
good morning to all. Thank you, Católica, for this kind of invitation. I would like to start with a provocative statement. We're talking about disinformation. Really must say that disinformation is a huge business. It's a huge business, and also a political weapon. It's a huge business for social media platforms, because it brings a lot of flux of information and advertising income. And that's why I think the first level of action should be at regulatory level regarding the competition law and the question of the digital advertising market. Once we have regulation of digital advertising market, we can put some limits on the disinformation disorder and practice. The second point I would like to make up is the need for an educational level field program. Media literacy programs are very, very important. The problem with media literacy, it's a long-time objective. And we are facing nowadays a dramatic problem. If you, for instance, recall what in this morning we heard from Professor Napali about the bankruptcy of local news organizations in the United States. In Europe, it's the same, and in Portugal, the same either. So we need some more fast actions. I'm not saying that media literacy programs are not useful. They are very useful. They are structural measures, but those structural measures are long-term object measures. We need just more fast actions. The third point of intervention I would like to point out is the need of a more collaboration between the main stakeholders. For instance, the project that IMPRESA with SIG, with Polígrafo, is one of the examples. It's a kind of a joint venture between a fast-checking independent project like Polígrafo with a main private media organization, a legacy media organization like IMPRESA. So more collaboration between the main stakeholders, in my perspective, is essential. The fourth point I would like to stress is the need to have public funding. Public funding for fact-checking projects and also for artificial intelligence measures. For instance, if we see, concerning the European Union projects for science, we have a lot of budget allocated to artificial intelligence in other industries, not for the media industry. Why? Because the simple concept of media as an industry, it's not a common concept nowadays, but it should be. Media industry, it's an industry. So the media industry as a whole, including the work of journalists, should profit from the European funding in what regards artificial intelligence. For instance, Polígrafo is starting developing an algorithm, its own approach. It costs a huge money, that project. It should be subsidized by European fundings. It's one example. Thank you.
Okay. So, I think you can hear me. I'm just. Oh, thank you. I was just thinking what Tanja, she's already tackled this idea of the concepts, like misinformation, malinformation. And I was thinking that fake news has already gained this concept status. But I think it's important to look at it and realize its true scope. And both Jéssica and Gustavo, in your books, they make this exercise. What is real fake news? Fake news, not fake news. It could be. So, Jéssica and Gustavo, could you please let us know, and all our students here who use this concept or this expression, fake news, at all the time, what is really fake news?
Well, fake news, first of all, are not news, so it's not news made by a journalist or a media organization, a legacy media organization. Fake news is something that goes online. It is the habitat, and it is either false or misleading or misinformation, and it's made by non-journalists and non-media organizations. As Jéssica told you some minutes ago, some politicians use the concept of fake news to attack the journalists and the media, so they can relate the fake news to the newspapers and some news that are not good for them. So it's like a synonymous fake news as bad news for that politician. So it's another concept, and that's a battle of speech, which is very complex. And in my book, I try to explain that I could use another term for the fake news phenomena, but everybody understands what is fake news. So it's a popular term, and we have to, use the term that reaches the most people to automatically understand. So every time I speak about fake news, you understand what I'm talking about, and I don't have to explain in 20 minutes that fake news it's this and not that, and the concept and the etymology. So it's like an easy way to speak about that phenomenon, and to contrariate the politicians that try to, neutralize some words and some concepts, and that language battle, which is much important in the political way. So in the end, I defend the fake news concept and term. There's another problem with the concepts of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation is to translate that to Portuguese. We don't have free words for this. It's all disinformation. So we try to, in Polígrafo, we try to explain the difference between what is intentionally false to deceive you from what is perhaps junk news. Junk news, it's like those projects online that the main objective is to get money from advertisers and traffic in online traffic, and it doesn't have sometimes a political objective behind, but they use like celebrities like Ronaldo or some well-known politician or actor, and sometimes they spread false stories about those persons that are very well known, but that's not to deceive or with a political objective. That's to gain money from advertisement. So there's a lot of different phenomena, and this malinformation concept, for instance. The other problem is when you don't have the intention to spread the false story, sometimes because of self-ignorance or because you don't see the date on the information. You don't see that news, that true news, it's from 20 years ago, and you're spreading like it was from yesterday. So it's like a non-intentional fake news. It's very complex, and it has several phenomena inside the fake news world. So, Jéssica.
I mean, he said everything that I would have said. Yeah, because fake news, there are a lot of different categories of information that might fit under that term. Even things like The Onion. Do you all know The Onion? It's jokes. It's fake news. But usually when we use the term fake news, especially when we're talking about journalism, what we mean is either deliberately false or created with so little regard for the truth that it might as well be, that just basically invented and made deliberately to look like journalism, right? It is purposely posted on sites with names that resemble existing mainstream news sites. And a lot of it was made, with financial motives in mind, and then there's the sort of the political motives too, and so it's hard to sort of pick apart which ones are which, but that's sort of a general definition. And it's distinct from journalism in that journalism is a fact-based reporting exercise in which if there are mistakes or inaccuracies that appear in a story, journalists are accountable to their audience, right? They will go back and correct that information, right? They are not actively trying to misinform, and in fact, when there is some inaccuracy in their reporting, they make a full effort to correct it, which creates a kind of an unfair playing field, right? Because you acknowledge your mistakes, which sort of makes you look like, I can't trust everything you say, and you're fighting on a playing field with other information creators who just create whatever they want and never go back and try to verify or support it in any way. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I don't know if you'd like to add something, or we can always add something.
But that we're going definitely, I think it's more important to have an open debate. So.
Okay.
Yes, just two things. One is that addressing the issue of the name, we also discussed that at the union. We decided that the term should be falsified news, because the problem is that if it's fake, it's not news. If it's news, it's not fake. But the truth is that in practice, we use fake news to talk about it because, as you've already said, everyone knows what we are talking about. So it's easier to discuss it and to make it a general term, so to speak. Yeah.
Now I will let them. In the project, we are also analyzing what type of stakeholders are included in this battle against fake news, and most of them are academics. And in order for academics to publish their work, there is a process, a long process that should be passed. It's like peer review, I don't know, and what academics are mostly doing is establishing a conceptual framework so that we have a common ground, like a dictionary to use about what is fake news. And while this is happening, the damage there is being done. And I often make this parallel. I imagine this context of fake news, we have an apocalypse that is caused by fake news, and one academician just rises from the ashes and says, I have the term, like I have the concepts, and the apocalypse is already processed. So,
but I think it's important to look at this.
Absolutely.
So I was just thinking, and Nuno, well, I didn't ask if you want to add something to the terms. Okay.
I'm looking for a question.
Okay. Just to recall the Reuters Institute Digital News report from 2019, and in Portugal, television is the main source of news with 81%. With online in second place with 79, very, very close. So from the media management point of view, how do you relate to think about this? Because we're always talking, when we talk about news and journalism, we normally make this connection with newspapers. We've already talked about news, expression, journalism, journalist, newspaper, social media, but we didn't talk about television or radio. There are legacy media, but there are media and they are present. And for instance, in Portugal, television has a huge presence. And as you can see, data from 2019, Portuguese prefer 81% television together and to be informed. So do you want to comment on this?
Okay. Yes, in fact, the television in Portugal.
Yes.
Yes, in fact, television in Portugal is the main media source of information for the citizens. Trying to answer to your question, Catarina, I really think that the key word is credibility and also quality. But the term quality, it's a very complex one, so I prefer to use the term credibility. And I really believe that for the future of the media system, we have to work on the credibility of the media output. And for that, projects of media literacy are very useful and are the key answer to the near future in order to educate the citizens of all ages. Yes. Media literacy is not only for the children, it's also for the adults. I would like to say it's for all the society, including the professionals of media. Including the professionals of media. And that's a dramatic point. Because nobody from the media sector wants to recognize that themselves they need to have media literacy. That's and from the academic perspective also, that's a huge problem on the courses of media in order to give the right skills to the students in order to face the deformed chaos we are living in. So credibility. And credibility is always the key word for any media outlet, I think.
Okay, so we already talked about, I don't know if you want to add something on other media, and as I was talking about television and how to, no, okay, out of time. So we already talked about media literacy, and of course it is important not to drawing attention only to citizens, but also to decision makers. I was just to remember that, for instance, I don't know if you already know the strategic plan for the European Union for the Creative Europe 21-27. This Creative Europe program is directed to culture, media, and there's a third area which is intersectoral part, and this new strategic plan for the next 6-7 years is exactly to journalism and to media journalism. And I'm quoting, so the European Union develops activities to promote an environment of freedom, diversity and pluralism in the media and supports quality journalism and media literacy. And there's a huge amount of money, I really don't remember, but to support. So you were talking about this need to have support. I think there's something, we are doing something, I'm talking about as a European and as a Portuguese, so I'm talking now for a Portuguese example, that we now have a General Secretary, depending on the Ministry of Culture, which is of cinema, audiovisual and media, exactly to support. And one of the points, and for instance, even our president is always addressing this issue to support the media and support not even as I started, not even the problem of fake news, but also how to deal with as, for instance, you, the younger, we have this in mind, this free access, it's online, it's free, we don't have to pay. So I think we have to, not just the question of the false information, but also the sustainability of the media, of this media sector. So, well, bearing in mind all of these questions that I'm talking about, and I would like to, back to you, Tanja, and about the Compact project, which is very appropriate and to, like you were saying, to have some ideas to support even the European Union to make and to make decisions on this. So do you want to develop a little bit more about the importance of the Compact project on this issue?
I would just like to add that probably the most important realizations that we've come to through the project are that there are way too big differences, contextual differences across countries in order to seek for a unified regulation within the continent. For example, you just mentioned that the main information source in Portugal is TV. This is very different from what you can see across other countries. Take Scandinavia, for example. Take Slovenia, for example, where the main source is social media, actually. And so this is one thing. There are too big contextual differences for this to be covered by a unique regulation or law. Then what is important when we talk about state intervention is the context where state intervenes. Is it within the financing? Is it within providing a framework for incentives for the stakeholders to be included, or to, because very often one result from the project is that on the one side there are a lot of initiatives that try to address the problem of fake news, but most of them are not open to multiple stakeholders. And those that are open don't have the inclusion by their stakeholders at the level that is beneficial for all of them, because they don't have the incentives to address the problem in the first place. Then there is a great lack of civic inclusion within all of these. For example, especially from the digital rights activists, gender rights. I mean, as individuals, we're all part of the problem and concerned by its effects in return. So it's the individual's obligation as well to get included into the fight against, if there is such a fight. I mean, very often that is dramatized to say, well, we have a war on this, war on information, war, because if we proclaim war, then everything is allowed, you know. So what is, it's like a chicken and egg problem. What was first, the need for regulation or the fake news, you know? Sometimes you say, you claim a problem just to make a regulation. That's also a possibility. So it's cat and mice and chicken and egg problem.
And also these needs, for instance, we need a fact-checking platform, but if you have a quality journalism, you don't need a fact. So you are like, why do you need a fact-checking?
Because technology matters and the scale of the problem is different. It's not just when you have traditional media, the scale at which information reaches its audiences, it's very different from through social media. So fact-checking, it's not about the veracity of the information. It's also about the sources, checking the sources, checking the content in itself, checking the fact that this information passed before it got in front of you. So there are a lot of technological processes that happen, and that is where I believe that fact-checking matters. Yes, it should be this. It's distinct from journalism, although journalism is fact-checking by itself, but it's in a narrow context. That's not what we think about when we talk about fact-checkers and organizations like those.
Gustavo, do you want to add something on this topic? Or?
Maybe about fact-checking, we should underscore the fact that in some recent elections in the United States and in Brazil, we have some signs that there could be a massive wave of fake news utilized to deceive an election. And when you join that phenomena of fake news with the project of companies like Cambridge Analytica, which uses all our personal data from Facebook and other social networks, it's a big problem. And if you see great journalistic reports from Guardian about Cambridge Analytica or the documentary that was recently made at Netflix, you see that they use personal data of individuals in key states in the United States with a psychological profile of what those persons consume or what they are afraid of or their personal convictions about something, and they weaponized fake news in the news feed of those people so that they could influence them to vote in some candidate that was paying for those fake news to be spread. A big industry that was being produced in Macedonia and some other countries of Eastern Europe. So it's not just junk news, or it's not just some misinformation online. It's becoming a threat to our democracies and open societies. So it's a really big problem. Here in Portugal, we don't have that yet. We don't have some big investment in that kind of fake news. I'm starting to see some phenomena online, but it's all without no sophistication and without data, big data, but it's a threat, and in the future it could happen. So I think that it's a big issue on regulatory means and political means to address in the next few years. So I would like to underscore that.
Jessica, do you want to add something?
I mean, I think they've said many of the things that I would have said. I agree. I think going back to a point that Nuno made earlier, this idea that the incentives in especially social media systems are such that they reward
Lies.
What's that?
Lies.
And not just lies, but emotional information, right? So outrage is one of the most effective ways to get your information to be promoted. And so we do need to think about how we can incentivize or de-incentivize the spread of that kind of information. And just also listening to this, I've been thinking a lot about, I think it's a tendency we all have to sort of technological determinism where we're like, oh, social media caused this problem. I mean, propaganda existed before social media, right? Fascist dictators were very successful in getting in power without social media.
But with media.
With media, right. But but if we're blaming or looking at social media and the role that it's playing, and so I keep thinking about online ethicists and what they said maybe even like a while ago, 15 years ago, the things that are actually fundamentally different that happen on the internet, it's in terms of speed, which, that's an obvious one, and scope in terms of how many people, right? So, maybe you could have spread your little propaganda to a few people, but now it gets to a lot more people a lot faster. And then anonymity, that we don't know the source of information. It's easier to hide where it's coming from. So Macedonian teenagers can create fake news that ultimately influences voters in a county in Wisconsin, who then, a difference of tens of thousands of votes turns that state and results in, changing an election in the United States. So just sort of thinking about those three key features and then maybe trying to target our response to them at those differences specifically.
So, Isabel,
Yeah.
but just to finish in a positive tone.
How will it? Actually,
Just to add something, so you talked about this project, and I think it was a successful one, and you have the second year, and we talked about high school, but as Nuno was saying, it is important to all of us, even for you as students and communication and some of you future journalists, and for us also as teachers. So what's the next step of the Portuguese Journalists Union on this point?
I'll answer to that, but before I will dramatize. You asked me not to. I would just want to stress out yes, exactly. 2 points. One is that this issue of fake news is also being studied nowadays by neurosciences and by other kinds of scientists besides the ones in communication. And one of the things that they are getting to is that one of the reasons to believe so much or go so much to fake news has to be with the lack of confidence in institutions on one hand, and on the other hand, on the idea that it was talked about in the previous table, this idea that we are all doctors, we are all journalists, but also that we are all doctors, we are all teachers, we know everything because information is there. So
Google.
Yes, exactly. So it's obviously it's not a problem, and maybe we can save ourselves by looking for information sometimes because you see that maybe this is a reason to go to the doctor. But this is also killing people because there's this, I don't know if you have the notion of these huge problems with vaccines, for instance, where misinformation, this crisis of credibility in institutions is making parents decide not to vaccine their children, and this is happening in countries like France. So, and in people of middle class and informed and with studies. So it's not an easy issue, because it's not like only ignorant people go this way. It's not true. So it's very complex. But I just wanted to add these things. And the other complex thing is that, as it has already been said, it's very profitable to say lies, because it's what's more spread apparently, or at least it's easily spread. And it gives money to the social media. But going to the good part, or at least we're trying to address that topic. As I said before, we are now going to the second pilot. So going to more classes, to more teachers, to more students. But we are also studying the possibility of going to more senior audiences and children. This is more difficult in the logistic terms, because you don't. Whereas in school, you go to schools and you address teachers, and teachers address children. So it's not been easy. We've been working on this for 3 years. So it's more obvious how to get there. Whereas in little children, you'll have to be more directed. You cannot go to all schools. First of all, because you don't have an institution that has them all, and to the seniors the same. But we have been asked to, for instance, from senior universities and things like that, to work on this. So this is one thing that we are thinking about, because obviously, as we've all said, it's a problem of everybody, not just young, not just adults, not just elderly.
Okay, thank you. So we have some time for Q&A. So I open the floor for you. Yes, please.
Hi. I have actually, it's not a question, it's more like a comment. But a way of spreading media literacy more widely would be having the resources of media legacy enterprises. Like if the news stations, the broadcasters in general could donate some time on their programming for media literacy, it would help a lot. So I'm actually asking, how can you guys help in this way? Can you guys donate some time for media literacy, for example, in radio, television? It would spread like more easily, right? In Portugal, we have the most people watching TV, so why not?
I can answer.
Yes, I think it is for you.
Yeah.
You guys.
Yes, you, but also you.
Yes. Well, I came from a private media outlet.
Yes.
And we in private media, we have made a collaboration project with Polígrafo. But I think the main point here is the obligations of the public service broadcaster, RTP. It's the partner, it's the right partner to make that, because it's funded by our taxes. So if you ask for a media to do that job, the first answer should be public service.
Yes, but also broadcasting is like not funded by, in your case, in private cases, it's not funded by the public, but you use you spread through air, so it is a public service.
Yes, it's why we have the Polígrafo program.
Yes.
And it's a huge audience success. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Catarina.
Yeah, I have a question to Jéssica and to Nuno. Thank you all for the panel. Isabel, I want to give you a hug, because I really thank you for giving hope. But my question to Nuno is actually what you said before, that the media literacy takes too long and we actually need to act now.
Yeah.
I see that, but most of the time, or in some cases, the money comes from public funding. And then you have two projects, one that acts now and one that acts in the long run. The tendency is to act on the short run. What we have now in the world scenery has been a long-term project.
Yes.
So if we, start looking for short-term projects, we're going to kill the media literacy, which is a long project. So I would like to hear more if you have more ideas of how to do this in the short-term basis. And if you see that it could actually, if you have to choose, then you would rather choose to do it. Then the question to Jéssica is just, I really like what you said about taking more responsibility of the users. And you mentioned that maybe having a check, are you sure? And then triple check, I really want to do that. But how do you see also, we know that this will be good, but it's not so feasible to do it now. So if you have more thoughts about this and how to actually bring this responsibility to the users.
Let's just ask if we have time for one more question. So is there anyone who wants to? Yes, so will you please do now and then we...
Okay, so we are all talking about fake news and how hard it is. In 2017, after the 2016 elections, there was this challenge called the Fake News Challenge, where 80 teams from around the world competed on that challenge to detect fake news from title to content on natural language. It's more of a technical side. The three teams that came in first place, they all have their public algorithms. So you can go and you can check the algorithms, you can check the machine learning map and all of that. So that was in 2017, and then I would like to know how far, if you know it, how far have we gone into apply that into more practical ways? Because one of the questions I sometimes think about is it really the journalist who is responsible to check fake news, or is it the media that is responsible, who is not exactly the same? And then there are different techniques that you can apply. Because if we are fighting this, not war, but this fight with the same people that are supposed to produce the real news, then they won't have time if they are to do the check. So this is kind of a balance. And then there's technology who is open source, you can check it, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. This was in 2017, and the three top teams have their public algorithms. So maybe there's something here that we could do differently in order to address the issue.
Okay, thank you. So, want to start?
Should I start? Okay, I think that's such a great question, and I think there's basically three ways in which we could address that sort of social media users and give them a stronger sense of the responsibilities that they have when they're using social media. One is the sort of structural thing I talked about, and Instagram already has something like that, at least when it comes to hateful or harmful comments. So if you post something, they have an algorithm. It's AI that identifies, oh, that looks like you're making a personal attack. Are you sure you want to do that? And so if we could develop and introduce more of those kinds of checks, if we've gotten okay AI in terms of identifying questionable information, then maybe introducing more of that, or just in general making the process slower. The time it takes to create an account on any of these social media networks, it takes longer to download the app than to create the account, right? You put in your username, you create a password, and you can immediately receive and disseminate information to everyone you know. And so I think slowing that process down, and so, no one reads the terms of use and user agreements, but, if you had to pass through, for example, a series of tutorials and take a quiz that showed that you understood how information works on social media. So it's not even necessarily, I think, about what's factual and what's not, but what happens when you share something? What happens when you like something? How does information get amplified? And what are you doing all the time that's actually contributing to how information is received by everyone else on the network? you have some responsibility. You're not just a free actor. So that, I think even introducing things like, a list of sort of ethical responsibilities for users of social media, that all of the sites say this is what we aspire to, the same way that journalists have ethics codes that they aspire to. And it doesn't mean that every journalist is perfect all the time, but at least the idea that they sit down and they say this, at some point they read it and they say, this is what I aim to do as a person on this site. And then the third one is probably about the financial incentives. And so reducing the way that things get rewarded for being outrageous and anger inducing and whatever else sort of, that.
Thanks. I absolutely agree with Jessica's approach. And by no means I want to kill the media literacy programs. By no means that. My concern is that the problems we are facing are in a speed, in an incredible speed. As I told you before, we are talking about a huge business and also a political weapon. And once it is a political weapon, the state must intervene. And how can the state intervene? In my perspective, the state can play a two-dimensional role. The first one is by regulation, and that means competition law. It's the only fast way to intervene. It's why the European Commission at the European level is trying to make a regulation on abuse of dominant position of digital platforms like Google and Facebook. It's on that approach that we can have not in 1 year achievements, but I will say in 3 years. So we are talking now at 3 years action programs. Media literacy can take 5, 10, 15 years, I really don't know. Concerning your point, I absolutely agree with you, but if you regard to the problem of deep fakes, the deep fakes requires artificial intelligence. Yeah, and that's a huge problem nowadays. We have, as I know, we have not public software available in order to fight against that, because it's being developed.
But the problem there, is that we are already jumping to the next threat, and we have not addressed the previous one.
Well, the previous one.
We are always going after the problem, and we never catch any of them.
The previous one, it requires one thing. It's very complicated. It's to have a common approach at the international or European level. That's the problem. I think it's rather difficult to achieve a common approach. Regarding Portugal, we have not a common approach. Observador has its own model, and Polígrafo are developing its own model also. So it's why? Because they are projects, they are competing in the market. We are always talking about the market. That's the truth. That's the truth.
But also there are issues. You cannot address them by one technical solution.
Of course.
Or by 3.
But that's, when you have a big problem, you chop in chunks and you address.
I don't agree with that, because the problems are intertwined. You cannot chunk very often. I'm an electrical engineer. Trust me. No.
Okay, Isabel?
Just to answer your question, we have now a protocol with FTP exactly to start content that they can have on media literacy for programs that they will have on that for younger people, not children exactly, but for
All ages.
young adults. Yeah, all ages.
Yes, please, thank you.
Okay, so thank you once again for your presence, for helping us.
On the positive note, I just wanted to remind all of us that there is social in social media, which means that when we use technology, sometimes it's better to restrain it to a technical context. So like fighting bots, fighting deepfakes, this is fine. But the social that I mentioned implies that there are some reputational implications for all of those that share fake news, especially intentionally. Because when you mentioned we should increase we should make the processes longer, they are longer for social media because you first have to make your community. It's not just sign in and your community is there. You create your community, and to keep that community, to have that human capital that we say you have to behave in certain ways. And those are the reputational implications of your behavior. So if you are not behaving in a trustworthy manner, you will lose your human capital. That's the social part of the science. So not always we need regulation for the problem to be solved on a larger scale. We just have to address the problem at the right spot.
Okay, so thank you. Work starts at 2 p.m.